He's pursuing a minor in urban and regional planning and is an aspiring public interest and housing attorney. He currently serves as the legal intern for YIMBY Law, a lead at Gainesville is for People, and a UF Habitat and Humanity Undergraduate Ambassador. Please give a warm welcome to Vishnu.
How y'all doing? Let's talk about housing. My name is Vishnu Malhotra, and today my TED Talk is going to be making the case for building more housing. I want to thank Luana for the wonderful introduction, but apart from the professional reasons as to why I'm doing this, I want to talk about a little bit like how did I get involved with it personally. And it all started with my high school chemistry teacher. His name was Mr. Iman. He was an immigrant from Iran, and he was a young guy teaching both at my high school and the University of South Florida. And after graduation, me and my best friend had dinner with Mr. Iman, and he told us that he was struggling to afford to live either near the university or near our high school because his rent had shot up more than 20% year over year. And in that moment, the housing crisis became real for me, and it supercharged my interest in it. So let's start with talking about the housing crisis and how bad it really is, because it is pretty bad. As you can see in the graph on the right, this is measuring housing supply, the darker blue line, and the lighter one is housing price. So as we've seen supply increase during the Great Recession leading up to it, we saw a massive decrease in prices. But since that point, and throughout most of American history, housing prices have steadily been on the rise with a massive increase in the last 2 years. We know that this is because of a housing shortage. The exact number, well, Freddie Mae, which is one of the federal government's mortgage backing companies, says that the shortage is about 3.8 million homes nationwide. But that number ranges anywhere from 1 to 6 million. So, we know we have an issue. How bad is it? Since 1980, the average price per square foot of a home in this country has increased by 310%, according to HomeBet. And since 2020 alone, home prices have exceeded overall inflation by 139%. So we know there's an issue, and we know what that issue entails. And it entails so much more than just higher housing prices. It means that people struggle to live close to where they work, which means worsened walkability metrics. It means that we're forced to build outwards rather than upwards, which creates environmental sprawl. It means more homelessness. It means more unaffordability. And it means that we're shifting the market artificially to give landlords more power. So when I say that, I mean that landlords have more power when we restrict housing supply because they face less competition from other landlords. When I say there's an increase in homelessness, I'm talking about the fact that for every $100 increase in rent, there's a 9% increase in homelessness, according to the Government Accountability Office. And when I'm talking about the reinforcement of housing segregation, I'm talking about how when communities lock down and restrict new development, it oftentimes leaves people of color out of the richest, whitest neighborhoods in our country. And it's been used throughout history, and it's continued today. So how did this happen? You might be wondering to yourself, like, why did we get here? Why aren't more homes just being built, right? A huge part of the reason has to do with what's called zoning. Zoning basically says you can build this in this area and this in that area. So it says you can build a factory over here, you can build a single family home over here, you can build an apartment complex over here. The issue is that zoning is important, but in this country, we've overused what's called single family zoning. Over 75% of the residential land in this country is zoned exclusively single family, which means that the only thing you can build on that piece of property is a detached single family home. When we do this, we not only lock people into one type of housing option, but we end up building outwards rather than upwards. And it increases housing prices because we're not able to build enough to meet demand. And one interesting thing I want to show you here. This is Gainesville. West Gainesville, as you can see, has the majority of single family zones in the city. East Gainesville, which is predominantly black, does not. Typically, majority communities with more people of color have typically held the vast majority of multifamily housing developments, which means that they hold the burden of our housing supply. This only worsens inequality, and what further worsens inequality is something called density restrictions. There are 4 main things in density restrictions. There's one thing called lot size minimums, which says that for every home that you build, you have to build it on X amount of square feet of property. There's something called setbacks, which says that every home has to be X amount of feet from the property line. And then there's something called parking minimums, which say that for every number of people in an area or for every square foot, you have to build X amount of parking spaces. all of these things combined create a situation where we cannot build density. What that means is the issue is not a single family home. The issue is not wanting a large home or a large lot or a large setback. The issue is that we require it. And when you require it in 75% of the country, you cannot build communities that allow for enough housing to be built. You cannot build upwards, which creates environmental sprawl, and we see all of the issues that I talked about on one of the first slides. The final thing I'm going to talk about is called permitting and construction costs. Very simple, but when you make it harder to build a home in this country, you end up restricting home development to the largest developers and the biggest investors. So if you ever wonder why near our university there's only luxury housing being built, you might be wondering, why does that happen, right? Those are some of the only areas in the city where you can build dense housing. That makes that land incredibly valuable. The only people who can afford to buy that land and build on it are the largest developers and investors. So in order to recoup their investment, they build luxury housing. This is what we see. And all of these things combined are best explained in this image. So what I'm talking about is we see high rises, and we see detached single family homes. You almost never see everything in the middle. Gainesville is unique, we have some of it, but in most of the US, you see barely any of these types of homes. It's called missing middle housing, and they're basically illegal to build in most of the country. By making it illegal to build all these types of homes, we've restricted ourselves not just to a couple ways of living, but we've artificially restricted the supply of new housing. And a large part of that has to do with people wanting the value of their home to just continually increase over time, and the fact that we've treated housing as an investment rather than as a human right. So what can we do to solve this? And now I'm going to move on to the solutions. And one of them, the most primary one, is called upzoning. Upzoning basically means it's when you take a property that's zoned very low density and you upzone it to something that's higher density. So like taking a single family lot and saying you can build a 2-story quadplex on this lot. Or taking more areas of our city and saying you can build a townhome or you can build a cottage house, right? When you do that, you enable citizens, people in the market as a whole to build upward rather than outward, meet supply, and end this crazy situation that we're in. Density and permitting go along the same lines of just making it easier to build new homes, to address our housing shortage. I want to briefly touch on the fact that supply is not the only issue here. And while I would love to talk about all these things more in depth, we have a limited time, and so for the brevity of the presentation, I'm just going to mention that affordable housing, tenant protections, and investments in transit are 3 really important parts of the housing debate, but this presentation is focused exclusively on supply. And that's where I get to the political process, in terms of why haven't we done these things already? Why is it so hard to make these changes? And if they're so great, why don't we see them more? A huge part of the reason is that there are massive vested interests in this country against the changes that I'm talking about. Namely, it's the fact that we've treated housing as an investment that should raise in value over time, rather than as a human right that people have the right to live. So when I say that, I'm saying when you buy a home, you expect in 10 or 20 years for the value of that home to increase, right? But when you buy a car, you expect the value of that to decrease. When you buy a phone, you expect the value of that to decrease. Why do we treat one of the only necessities for human life as something that the value should continuously increase over time, rather than as a normal good, which is that as it gets worse over time, its value should fall? In addition to that, that's that. But let me go back one second. If we want to build more diverse, affordable, equitable, and environmentally friendly communities, then we need to get the government out of the housing market. That sentence is really weird. I just said something that's really liberal and something that's really conservative, which brings me to my favorite slide, which is that anyone in this room or in the world or in the country can be a YIMBY. That means yes in my backyard. If you're a liberal, you should agree with these ideas because they promote environmental friendliness, they increase your ability to walk and bike to places, they increase affordability, they increase equity, and they increase racial diversity. If you're a conservative, you should agree with these ideas because they promote the free market, they restore private property rights to landowners, they allow people to choose where they want to live, and they let the housing market function as it normally would. So this is an issue that doesn't rest exclusively with one side of the aisle. And it's something that my friends on both sides of the aisle have disagreed with me and agree with me on. And finally, I'm going to talk about how you can all make a difference if you're interested in doing so. And you definitely can. In Gainesville in particular, we have a median age around 26 to 27 years old, but every time I go to a city commission meeting, the average age of that meeting is exceeding 50 by like huge margins. What I'm saying is that you have a voice as a student, and city officials really care when you show up to meetings and you voice your opinion and you say what you believe. Even if you're not into that, you can join local housing organizations like Gainesville is for People. And most of all, above everything that I've talked about, if you're gonna take away one thing from this presentation, it would be to have your mind open to talking with people on all sides of the issue. I've talked with friends who really disagree with everything that I just told you, and I've talked with people who agree with a lot of what I just said. And I'm gonna do the same with everyone in this FLC class. If you wanna talk to me about this, people like Sam know that I could literally talk about this for hours. So please come to me, please talk with people about it, and that's it. Those are my sources, and thank you for listening.